We are all so excited that you're here today, and we're so excited to learn everything that David has to share this morning. Before I start, I just wanted to go over a few ground rules for the class, and then also go over a brief background of the NKA and how it got started. And then I'll also introduce David as well. But I'm Bethany, I'm with AARP Idaho. And so a few ground rules are participants can leave the class at any time. Everyone's microphones will be muted. If you have any questions, please go ahead and ask them in the chat. And the way that you can access the chat, if you're not familiar with Zoom, is if you go to the bottom of your screen, just bring your mouse down there, and you should see a little chat logo pop up. And if you just click on that, you'll be able to input all of your questions in the chat. And so I will be monitoring that the whole time. And I'll make sure that if you do ask a question, that David gets it and that it's answered. And then along with this, please stick to just professional language and behavior only during the class. And so a brief background on NKA is over 15 years ago, a group of dedicated volunteers came together to create a lifelong learning program in Pocatello in partnership with Idaho State University. Volunteers looked at many different models and decided to create new knowledge adventures that had some key components of affordable access, volunteer governance, volunteer instructors, and active engagement of the community. And now here we are in fall 2020, and NKA Treasure Valley is offering online classes due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we are the only NKA group in Idaho offering online classes. So it's very exciting that we have the capacity to do this and that we can carry this out. And now for David. So David is our instructor today, and he is a taphophile, which is one who has a special historical interest in cemeteries and he's a cemetery historian. He grew up in the Chicago area where he worked in law enforcement, and it was his love for the blues and jazz music styles that led him to begin taking photos of the graves of Chicago area musicians. David moved to Oregon in 1973, where he began his career in emergency medical services, and he moved to Idaho in 1986. He has traveled extensively in his career as a paramedic and instructor. And for 20 years, David has traveled the US and international locations for his work and located and photographed historic and unique cemeteries and graveyards. He has presented Who Lies Beneath, a virtual walking tour of the cemeteries in Idaho, and Carved in Stone, a study of gravestone symbols for Boise Community Education and AARP for several years. And he has also presented at many genealogy and family history conferences and seminars throughout the US. And David is a tour guide at the Old Idaho State Penitentiary in Boise. And finally, in addition to his continuing work in EMS, David has also worked for local funeral homes. So, like I said, we're all so excited that you're all here today and to be able to learn from David. And I will go ahead and hand it over to you, David.
Well, that sounds like I'm really busy. Thank you all for coming. This is a class that I've been doing for a number of years, put together for Boise Community Education a number of years ago. And it was kind of the result of doing walking tours of the cemeteries for Parks and Recreation. Parks and Rec and I got together several years ago and thought it'd be cool to do some walking tours of the cemeteries. And then we started getting into inclement weather and an hour and a half of walking and uneven ground and all kinds of things. And so I stopped doing those a few years ago. I think they might still do one or two of them through Parks and Rec. But I thought it'd be a lot easier to do a virtual one, basically, and not being tied down to just one cemetery for walking tours. So we're going to cover several in the Treasure Valley. First off, obviously thousands of people are buried here in the Treasure Valley. Um, most of them are not famous. Most of them are not really well known to the public, but a lot of them have really interesting stories. And that's kind of what we tried to find here a little bit. Not only the famous folks that you've probably heard of, but some that you haven't, that are just have interesting and fascinating stories to tell. They can't tell us their stories anymore. So that's what we're going to be doing this morning, is listening to their stories. Now, there are some infamous people, if you want to talk about that, connected with the old Idaho State Penitentiary. Just going to talk about a couple of those. Probably one of the first or second most famous inmate we had at the Idaho Penitentiary, the old Idaho Penitentiary, um, was is actually buried in the cemetery. There's a little cemetery connected with the old Idaho State Penitentiary. It's not usually open to the public, but we do tours there periodically. It's past where the botanical gardens are, up the hill a ways. There's about 18 graves that actually have some type of marker, but through research and whatnot, we believe we found about 55 burials up there. Early days of the prison, if an inmate died, if there was no family or friends to claim their body, basically not a lot of ceremony. They put him on a cart, took him up to the old cemetery, dug a hole, and put him in. A lot of unmarked graves. The graves originally were marked with just wooden stakes, and of course those are long gone. And just a couple of years ago, we had Boise State University come out and do ground penetrating radar. And if you go out to the penitentiary, you can see the results of that. You can see the different burials that are out there. The problem is we don't necessarily know who is where with all the graves. We did find one. There's a very famous inmate that's buried at the penitentiary by the name of Raymond Snowden. And Ray Snowden was buried in an unmarked grave. And eventually they found that they knew that there was a grave there, but they didn't know who it was. So it has a little brick that says unknown. Just a couple of years ago, we think we found out where he was. So we think we've identified his grave, but he's under an unknown stone. Ray Snowden was the last execution that took place at the old penitentiary, 1957. There were 10 executions at the old penitentiary, all by hanging, all for murder. And Ray was the last one. And not only was he the last one, he was the only one that was done indoors. All the first 9 hangings at the penitentiary were done outside. They'd build temporary gallows, hang the inmates, and then tear the gallows down. 6 were done in the Rose Garden. 2 were done out in the number 2 yard where the farm was. One, the very first one, was done by what's known as the territorial prison. It was built before Idaho was a state, and that was the very first one. And it was right in the area of the territorial prison. But Ray was the last one. And he was done indoors. 1954, they built the last building there. It was maximum security, and they decided, hey, let's put indoor gallows in here. So he was the last hanging there. Now, Ray was hanged again. All the hangings were for murder. And September 1956, Ray and a friend of his decided to go to Garden City to have some fun. Garden City, if you're all familiar with where that is, for a long time had a very infamous reputation, even back as far as the 1920s during Prohibition. Garden City, because it was outside of the city limits of the big fancy city of Boise, was a lot looser. And you could find just about anything you wanted to in Garden City. So people from Boise at night would sneak over to Garden City to either have a good time, have a lot of fun, or get in a lot of trouble, whatever you were looking for. So 56, Ray and a friend went over to Garden City to have some fun. His friend had a car. They drove over. And Ray met a young lady by the name of Cora Dean. And the two of them really hit it off. And there was a very famous club over in Garden City at the time called the Hi-Ho Club. And it was great. It was very popular because it had a really cool band. It had a big dance floor, had a great bar. And Ray and Cora spent part of the evening at the Hi-Ho Club, drinking and dancing and having a great time. Somewhere along the line, it was decided that the Corps was, when Ray left, when Ray went home that night, the Corps was going to go back home with him, come back to Boise, spend the night with him. Um, Ray got tired. It was time to go home, and they couldn't find his friend who had the car. So Ray and Cora went outside the Hi Ho Club to look for a taxi for to take the two of them back to Boise. And Ray's story, and of course Ray's is the only story we have. Ray claimed that they got into quite a fight over who was going to pay for the taxi back to Boise. It got physical, and Ray slapped Cora a couple of times. She didn't appreciate that, and in response to that, she kicked him in the groin a couple of times with her knee, and basically he snapped, went crazy, pulled out his pocket knife, and stabbed her 29 times, and also slit her throat. Her body was found across the street from the club the next morning. The 29 stab wounds, and her spinal cord was cut as well. The murder weapon, which was again a 2.5-inch pocket knife, was found Hannafin's cigar store. Used to be downtown. It just closed last year, but Hannafin's was a very famous cigar store down there. And the employees of Hanneman's even believe they saw Ray come into the store, use the bathroom possibly to wash off blood off his hands and whatnot. And he was seen at Hannafin's, and the next morning after the murder, a young boy collecting bottles to take back to the store for a refund found a knife in a drainage ditch next to Hannafin's. It wasn't a big stretch to arrest Ray for Cora's murder. They've been seen together all night. And the crime originally, he was charged with second-degree murder. Second degree, you kill someone, you meant to kill him, but it was kind of the spur of the moment, crime of passion type of thing. But when the jury heard about how heinous the crime was, how horrible it was, stabbing this poor girl 29 times, cutting her throat, and Ray really wasn't sorry about it. He showed no remorse at all. The jury, when they were deliberating, decided they wanted Ray to hang. And the only way you could hang at the time was first-degree murder. The jury actually goosed the charge up from second-degree to first-degree murder so they could impose the death penalty on him. In October 1957, Ray was hanged. And when you were hanged at the Old Penitentiary, a couple of things happened. First off, you got a new suit to be hanged in. And that way, if there were friends or family to claim your body, if you're going to have a funeral, the state provided you with a nice suit for your funeral. Second thing is you got anything you wanted for your last meal. Ray had Maine lobster for dinner. Now, Idaho did not have a full-time executioner at the penitentiary. They had to import one. They had to bring one in from Walla Walla, Washington, and they're not quite sure if maybe the noose wasn't tied exactly right or in the right spot. If you've ever seen old Westerns and movies, the big hangman's knot, there's actually a lot of science connected with that. That knot has to be in just the right spot. You fall through the trapdoor very fast. When you reach the end of the rope, that noose in just that right spot snaps your neck with the intention of breaking your neck, and it's a fairly fast way to die. Well, they're not sure if the noose wasn't put on properly or what exactly the problem was, but Ray's hanging did not work correctly, and it took Ray about 15 minutes to die hanging at the end of the rope. Ray was the only inmate hanged in the indoor gallows at the 5-house maximum security house. Excuse me. And if you get a chance to go out to the Old Penitentiary, be sure to go to 5-house, the second floor where the gallows are. Ray's victim, Cora Dean, is buried out at Cloverdale. You go out to Cloverdale Memorial Park, where Cloverdale Funeral Home is, and you will find Cora Dean's grave. She is out there. Another resident of the pen actually is also probably a little more famous than Ray on a national level. He served the longest sentence there So he's famous for that, but he's also famous for blowing up a governor of Idaho um, in 1905. They called it the trial of the century. His name was Harry Orchard. And, excuse me, he's famous for serving the longest sentence, but also for blowing up the governor of Idaho. Now, Harry was a professional assassin. That's what he did for a living. And back in 1905, there was a lot of mining activity up in North Idaho. And there was a union up there called the Western Federation of Miners. They were trying to get all the mine workers to join the union. Some wanted to, some didn't. And of course, the mine owners weren't happy about a union up there. And there was a lot of violence, a lot of riots. And Governor Frank Sternenberg, the governor at the time, sent up federal troops to squelch the riots. And he really limited the activities of the union. Union didn't like that. They hired Harry to get rid of the governor. Harry was a professional assassin, and he was hired to literally get rid of the governor of Idaho. 1905, December 30th, 1905, Frank Sternenberg, the governor, was killed by a bomb that was rigged to the gate of his house when he was living in Caldwell. Harry Orchard was kind of suspected originally when that happened. He had some close connections with the union. They knew about that. And he also was in town. He stayed at what was known as the Saratoga Hotel. His room was searched. And guess what they found? They found the bomb-making material in his room. And so he was arrested just a couple of days, a few days after Governor Sternenberg was killed. Harry was arrested. There was a Pinkerton detective involved and actually got a confession out of Harry. Harry actually decided at this point in his life that it was time to kind of turn over a new leaf and start doing things right. One of the reasons was that Governor Sternenberg's wife publicly forgave him for killing her husband. He was very impressed by that. And they were, Governor Sternenberg and his wife were members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And Harry was so impressed by Governor Sternenberg's wife's forgiveness of him, he joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church and decided to turn over a new leaf. He confessed to blowing up the governor while he was on the witness stand detailing what he did, his confession to the prosecutors, to the judge. Again, wanting to come clean with everything he ever did, he confessed to 17 other murders that he had committed. He also testified against the people that hired him from the miners' union. They never went to trial, however, because they had a very good attorney. The union officials hired a very famous attorney at the time that you may have heard of, Clarence Darrow. And he defended them. And basically, it turned out it was Harry's word against theirs, so they never went to trial. But Harry confessed to the governor, confessed to these 17 other murders. And Harry's testimony on the witness stand was nearly 23 hours total, confessing and giving details to all these different murders. Excuse me. 1908. Again, his trial came around. He pled guilty to murdering Sternenberg. He was sentenced to hang at the penitentiary, but the Idaho Commission on Pardons and Parole decided he had been very cooperative. He testified against the union officials. He had confessed to all these other murders, giving them details on that, and they decided instead to sentence him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He served 46 years at the old Idaho State Penitentiary, the longest sentence of any inmate there. Became very famous, actually. He died in 1954. And while he was there, again, he converted to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and he became basically a model prisoner. He became a trustee, And the prison operated a farm outside the walls. And in that farm, they raised chickens and turkeys, and Harry was put in charge of the poultry. He actually they built a small shack out there for him where he lived, and he was in charge of raising the chicken and turkey flocks out there. Last year or so of his life, he got very sick, suffered a stroke, was bedridden for the last 3 months of his life, brought back into the prison walls, into the prison hospital, and was in a coma for the last few days of his life. But he died in 1954. Again, the longest sentence there, 46 years at the penitentiary. Another inmate is actually out at Morris Hill Cemetery. The local cemeteries for a while had an agreement with the state and the county, and they would take in and bury some of the inmates from the different prisons in the area and put a small marker there. John Jerko was from Twin Falls. He's out at Morris Hill Cemetery. He was also hanged at the state penitentiary for murder in 1926. He and a friend had a mining claim together, and they were playing pool one night, and John's mining partner started making some disparaging remarks about John's wife's honor. John didn't like it. Shot and killed his mine claim partner at the pool hall, and basically just walked away, sat down outside. Police came and arrested him. He is what we believe one of the earliest attempts at an insanity plea. His attorneys tried to convince the court that he was mentally unstable to stand trial because he'd been kicked in the head by a mule when he was younger. Obviously, that defense did not work. He was hanged in 1926. We talked about Frank Sternenberg. Frank's out at Canyon Hill Cemetery in Caldwell. Very nice family marker, and his family's there. He won the governor. He became the governor of Idaho in 1896, and it was the biggest landslide in Idaho history when he became governor. Again, when the violence erupted, the labor disputes up in North Idaho with the mining and the union in 1899, Governor Sternenberg took a really tough stance, declared martial law. They sent up federal troops. And again, that led to the union hiring Harry Orchard eventually to get rid of him. Again, December 30th, 1905, came home to his home in Caldwell and pulled a wooden slide that opened the gate to get into his house to slide the door, triggered the bomb, exploded, and then within an hour he was dead. And again, it was in retaliation for the anti-union measures that he took up in North Idaho. Another famous person from the state pen, again, not necessarily famous, but among certain people well known, was not an inmate. He was a guard. Joseph Munch is out at Morris Hill Cemetery. He and his family are out there. And he was a guard captain at the state penitentiary for a very long time. He was actually born in Germany in 1931, immigrated to the U.S. in 1962. There were rumors that he was part of the Nazi youth movement over there when he was in Germany, but actually came to the United States to escape that at some point. But it came in 1962. Very tough, no nonsense guard. His English was fairly limited initially, but he got his point across, and he demanded and received respect from the inmates and the fellow guards. He was a tough guy, but he was also said to be very fair. If you treated him with respect, he would treat you with respect also. One of the senators from Idaho, Senator William Borah, he was known as the Lion of Idaho. He was a Republican senator for Idaho for 33 years, had a major role in ending World War I in 1918 and preventing the United States from joining the League of Nations and the World Court. He began practicing law in Boise in 1890, became a leader in the progressive movements, and that particular movement fought for political, social, and economic reform. Also, worker safety, the 8-hour workday. He was elected to the Senate in 1907, and in the 1920s became chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He has a very nice marker on what's called an island, basically his own little island out at Morris Hill Cemetery. And in 1892 became chairman of the Republican State Central Committee. Again, he was returned to office 5 times by very large majorities, and his tenure was one of the longest in U.S. history as a senator. He sponsored bills that established the Department of Labor and also the Federal Children's Bureau. When Harry Orchard was tried for killing Governor Sternberg, at the time, Bora was a co-prosecutor with James Hawley. There were 2 prosecutors in that trial. James Hawley and William Bora were the 2. And Governor James Hawley, again, with Bora, was a prosecutor in the Harry Orchard case. And he was an attorney and a politician. He was, excuse me, he was mayor of Boise from 1903 to 1905. The state's 9th governor from 1911 to 1913. Again, was a prosecutor and prosecuted a large number of criminal cases, and again was co-prosecutor in the Harry Orchard case. And during his administration as governor, he established highway districts, the State Board of Education, and also brought a lot of banking laws into being. And again, he and his family have a nice spot out at Morris Hill Cemetery. Governor Hawley came to Idaho in 1862. He was only 15 years old, but he was following the gold rush. A lot of people don't know there was a gold rush in Idaho, and a lot of folks that came out here during that time were looking for gold. And he came out here in 1862, only 15, wanted to be a miner, wanted to make his fortune in gold, and eventually became a very prominent attorney. And he had the reputation of trying more murder cases than any other attorney in the country. 1915, board of directors of the Idaho State Historical Society, president of the society. And 5 years later, there was a huge 4-volume book called The History of Idaho published. And because of Hawley's connection with the State Historical Society, he was the editor of that huge 4-volume book. Next, we have another senator out at Morris Hill, excuse me, Senator Frank Church. And Senator Church served Idaho for 24 years in the U.S. Senate, a most senior, respected member of the Senate, and he was very much involved in wilderness and protecting forest lands, things like that. And in 1964, he was the floor sponsor of the National Wilderness Act. 68, sponsored the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, gained passage of a 10-year ban on a federal plan that would have transferred water from the Pacific Northwest to California, helped establish the Hells Canyon National Recreation Area, and in 1980, he won passage of the River of No Return Wilderness Area.
David, we have a quick question.
Sure.
Eleanor was wondering where Morris Hill Cemetery is.
Morris Hill is on Latah Avenue, and it is just a little west of downtown. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the cross street. It's one of the city's largest cemeteries. If you find Latah Avenue, and I'm sorry, I don't know the cross street, but it's on Latah, just west of downtown a little bit.
Great, thank you.
Another governor that really is kind of famous on a national level was Governor Moses Alexander, because he was the very first Jewish governor in the United States. He is also out at Morris Hill Cemetery. He is right as you enter the cemetery. There's a very large Jewish section of the cemetery, and he's right in the front of that. Morris Hill is one cemetery that, because of its age, still has some designated sections. Not that it has to be followed anymore, but there is a Jewish section, there's a Catholic section, there is a Basque section, there's an Islamic section, and there's a fairly large Jewish section in the very front of the cemetery. And he's buried there with his family. 1914 became the first Jewish governor in the United States, governor of Idaho. Very witty, very eloquent, a very progressive governor. He actually moved to Boise in 1891, and that's a year after Idaho became a state. Idaho became a state in 1890, and he opened up a men's clothing store. And if you go downtown Boise, you will still find his name on the building where his store was, the Alexander Building. It still has his name on it. He was elected governor twice. He also was elected mayor of Boise twice. Started a state highway system, workers' compensation, state insurance commission. And there's a very nice section out at Morris Hill. Now, this is kind of an interesting one. This took just a little research here. Governor Alexander, Moses Alexander, and his family have a fairly large plot. He and his family are buried there. There's a large monument that says Alexander on it, and then each family member has a small one, like you'd see Moses Alexander there. Each individual family member has one of those little square markers. In the middle of these is a very different type of marker, Dorothy Ubaraga Farron. Now, Ubaraga is actually a Basque name. And to be very honest, if anybody knows, I'd love to hear it, because I'm still trying to do research on exactly what her connection was with Moses Alexander. Obviously, to be buried on the Alexander plot, she had to have some connection with him. But she is buried there with the Alexander family. A very different type of marker. Dorothy was born in Pennsylvania. She grew up in Los Angeles, moved to Boise in the 1940s, and married Pete Ubaraga. They had 4 children, and she worked as a subcontract administrator for a company by the name of Holmes and Norver, and it was a worldwide construction company. She died at home at the age of 85. And she loved Italian opera music. And the story is she died at home listening to her favorite music. Now, the mystery is, why is she on the Alexander plot? Okay, why is she buried with Moses Alexander's family at Morris Hill? If you look at her marker, the phrase at the very bottom of her marker, they figured that people seeing Dorothy's marker with the Alexander on the Alexander family plot would wonder, who is that? So if you look at the bottom of her gravestone, it's engraved the phrase, "Who dat?" Who is that? Who is she? Why is she there? Somebody had a sense of humor. Anna Morrow is another lady that's buried out at Morris Hill. And again, a lot of people don't necessarily know her. She's not vastly famous, but she had the nickname Peg Leg Annie. When she was 8 years old, she came to Rocky Bar, Idaho, on Independence Day in 1864 with her father, Stephen McIntyre, and he became part owner of the Golden Star Mine. Unfortunately, during an altercation and a fight, he was shot in the streets of Rocky Bar. And that left Annie on her own. She was only 17 years old. She married Thomas Morrow. Thomas was 16 years older than Anna. They got married in 1876. She was only 17. And apparently Thomas was a very cruel husband. And Anna couldn't take it anymore and later filed for a divorce. Now, during the gold rush, Anna owned what were known as houses of entertainment. And I assume you all know what a house of entertainment probably was back in the 1800s. She owned two of them, one in Atlanta, one in Rocky Bar. And during this time, women didn't own property. They weren't involved in business really. So she was really kind of a uh, kind of kind of a pioneer here. She was an entrepreneur. She owned a lot of businesses. She even owned mining claims when it was very rare for women to do any of that and be involved in business. She has a small stone at Morris Hill. And the way she got her name with Peg Leg Annie was in 1896. She and Emma, known as Dutch M, who was one of the what they know were known as soil doves, okay, with the houses of entertainment. Annie and Emma set out to walk from Atlanta to Rocky Bar. They were caught in a horrible blizzard. Blizzard raged on for 2 days. The women walked together, but they were encrusted with snow. They were crawling basically in the snow. They didn't show up in Rocky Bar when they were supposed to, so a search party was sent out. They found Annie still crawling through the snow on her hands and knees, and Dutch M was found dead. She was covered with Annie's underclothes. Annie had taken off some of her clothes to try to keep Dutch M warm, but Dutch M succumbed to the cold and died. Annie's feet were frostbitten. They had to be amputated above the ankles. And that's what got her the name of Peg Leg Annie. But very much a true Idaho pioneer woman owning businesses and mining claims and things when women just didn't do that. Probably most of you have heard of the Morrison Knudsen Corporation, huge construction company. And Harry Morrison and Morris Knudsen are buried fairly close together, also at Morris Hill Cemetery. Harry Morris was a Dutch immigrant. He was a farmer in Nebraska, came to Idaho in 1905 to work on the New York Canal. He was working on the project, and he was 27 at the time. And while he was working on the project, he met 50-year-old Morris Knudsen. Even though there was a vast age difference, the two of them hit it off really well. They became really good and tight friends. And in 1912, they had $600 in capital, some horses, some scrapers, wheelbarrows, and they formed their own construction company. During World War II, the Morrison Knudsen construction company, built airfields, storage depots, even ships, and they expanded into foreign construction, becoming a huge corporation. And at one time, there were construction projects from the Morrison Knudsen Company in over 60 different countries. Harry Morrison married Ann Daly, and the two of them were inseparable. And Ann died in 1957. In her memory, Harry constructed a 153 acre park, and you maybe have been there, Ann Morrison Park in Boise, named after Harry's wife. Another famous Idahoan in business, J.R. Simplot, Jack Simplot. If you've driven downtown, you've driven by a huge building by the name of Jump, and Jump stands for Jack's Urban Meeting Place. That's the J.R. Simplot building. He founded the J.R. Simplot Company. It's a huge agricultural supplier, specialized in potato products. Began his career at 14. 14 years old, he left home to work on a farm in Declo. By World War II, the Simplot Company had become the largest shipper of fresh potatoes in the nation. By 2005, the company supplied more than half of all the frozen French fries used by the McDonald's Corporation. He retired as president of the company in 1973, but remained as chairman till 94. Held the title of chairman emeritus until his death in 2008. 2001, he was given an honorary degree from Utah State University for the many contributions to the agricultural industry. Now, Jump, Jack's Urban Meeting Place. If you've been by there, if you've been to any of the classes or any of the rooms there, you notice that there are antique tractors all over the place. That's why one of the reasons the building was built. Jack had a huge collection of antique tractors. When he died, the family didn't know what to do with them. They didn't want to just stick them in a building, stick them in a museum to get dusty. They wanted people to be able to see them and enjoy them. So one of the reasons Jack's Urban Meeting Place was actually built was a place to house his tractor collection. And you can actually go there and they have tractor tours. They'll take you to show you all the tractors there. Joe Albertson, another famous Idahoan involved in business. Joe Albertson was the founder of Albertson Supermarkets, turned one small grocery store into $1 billion chain. A very notable philanthropist, very generous, he gave property to the city of Boise to develop Catherine Albertson Park as a wildlife reserve. He studied at the College of Idaho in Caldwell. And in 1927, he started his career in the grocery industry as a clerk at a Safeway store. 1930, he married Catherine, established the J.A. and Catherine Albertson Foundation as a way to administer their charitable giving. They focused mainly on education. And the company, Albertsons LLC, a limited liability corporation, is now, among many other things, the most recent one, if you've driven by Boise State University, the football stadium, it has been renamed Albertson Stadium. They now sponsor that stadium for BSU. This is another gentleman that really has an extremely interesting life, but most people haven't heard of him. James Jesus Angleton. James is buried, and his family are buried at Morris Hill Cemetery also. Quite a few members of the family grew up here. And he was chief of the Central Intelligence Agency Counterintelligence from 1954 to 1975. His official position was known as the Associate Deputy Director of Operations for Counterintelligence. He was brilliant, tireless, and very single-minded, but also obviously mysterious because of his job. Nobody really knew a lot about what he did until after he died, because so much of what he did was secret. He resigned from the CIA in 1975, and basically he was America's master spy. He was the American version of James Bond. He traveled the world and was responsible for catching dozens of international spies and returned home when he died here to Boise. Pearl Hendrickson is also at Morris Hill Cemetery. Excuse me. Hendrickson has a very small, excuse me. I'm sorry. Hendrickson has a very small marker at Morris Hill Cemetery, and he was killed in his cabin by a huge barrage of gunfire by one of the largest posses ever assembled in Boise. 1940, Pearl Hendrickson gunned down 2 federal officers. Hendrickson had a cabin, and he raised vegetables. That's what he made his living at, selling the vegetables. He was ordered to vacate the cabin in 1940 he was living in because the property had been deeded to the federal government. Hendrickson refused to leave. Deputy U.S. Marshal John Glenn came to attempt to serve a warrant to get Hendrickson to vacate the property, and Hendrickson shot him and killed him. Later on, he killed another U.S. Marshal, almost not by accident, really, but the Marshal was definitely in the wrong place at the wrong time. He shot U.S. Marshal George Meffin. Meffin's car just happened to stall in front of the cabin. And Meffin went up to the cabin to see if he could get help because of his stalled vehicle. Hendrickson thought he was there to serve another warrant and shot and killed Marshal Meffin. Now, Hendrickson's stone, original stone, was very old, became very cracked and barely legible. The current monument that you see there, the current stone that you see, was actually donated, and his grave, his new marker, was placed by Marshal George Meffin's descendants. Y'all remember Paul Revere and the Raiders? Famous rock group from the 1960s. Paul Revere has a very beautiful monument at Morris Hill Cemetery. Has a laser etching of him. The base, it's hard to tell in the photograph, but he was a keyboard player. The base of the stone has a keyboard on it. And Paul grew up in Caldwell. He was actually a barber in Caldwell. He had, pretty soon, he had 3 barber shops and even owned a drive-in restaurant. He formed a band with his friends called the Downbeats, and that later became Paul Revere and the Raiders. If you remember, Paul Revere and the Raiders always wore Revolutionary War costumes. The reason for that, and the reason for the name Paul Revere and the Raiders, came about because they were America's answer to the British invasion in the 1960s of the Beatles and the Dave Clark Five. They were America's answer to that British invasion. The band appeared on many national TV shows. Dick Clark, who had a number of TV shows, very involved in the music business, really liked him. So they were on several of his shows. He toured right up until the year before his death with the group. He also led a very large memorial motorcycle ride every year for veterans. He lived in, he actually lived in Garden Valley at the time of his death. He died of brain cancer, and I'm sorry, I haven't corrected my slide. He didn't die in 1914. He died in 2014, but he died of brain cancer. He lived in Garden Valley. Now, Paul and his wife actually picked out the spot for his grave before his death. He wanted to be in a spot that was very accessible to his fans. He is right on a curve. You can't miss him. And he also wanted to be in a very historical section of the cemetery. And he is literally buried about 20 feet from Harry Orchard in an old section of the cemetery. You can't get more historical than that. But his grave is fairly easy to spot. Again, very beautiful laser etching of him in his Revolutionary War costume. Another fairly famous Idahoan, Steve Appleton, the chairman of CEO of Micron. We have quite a few people in Idaho that have died, fairly famous or well-known or even wealthy people that have fairly modest markers. And Steve's is one of those. Steve is at Dry Creek Cemetery, very pretty cemetery, a little ways out of town. Steve was chairman and CEO of Micron Technology, and he was killed in the crash of a small experimental plane that he was flying here in Boise. He was an avid pilot. He flew all kinds of experimental aircraft. He flew in air shows, and he was even an off-road car racer. Considering his position with Micron, I'm amazed that his life insurance company let him do that stuff. But he was always involved in either flying or off-road racing. He actually survived crashes. In 2004, he crashed a plane while he was flying aerobatic maneuvers over the Idaho desert. And the witnesses say that Appleton and his passengers literally had to crawl from the wreckage after the crash. It was blamed on pilot error. He has a very modest marker up on a hill, a very nice hill up in Dry Creek Cemetery. And he joined Micron in 1983, and he just continued to progress in that company. Became production manager, director of manufacturing, vice president of manufacturing, According to the company's website, all these jobs that he advanced to. 1991, he was appointed president and CEO. 1994, appointed chairman. 1994, he was appointed chairman and CEO. And he assumed the current position that he had when he died in 2007. But again, a very modest marker up on a very nice hill up in Dry Creek. There's another one, gentlemen, that many people haven't heard of. Pete Hawley, his real name was Timothy Peterson. Now, Timothy Peterson was part of the Peterson family that's affiliated with the car dealership. But he was part of that family. He went by the name of Pete Hawley, the professional name of Pete Hawley, and he formed a band called Pete Hawley and the Looks. He's actually not too far from Steve Appleton up on the hill in Dry Creek. And again, most people haven't heard of this young man. According to the music reviewers, the music critics at the time, Pete Hawley and the Looks, they were the only all-original punk new wave band playing in Boise from 1976 to 1981. They came out with a 3-song single for a company called Bomp Records in 1979. And they were on several other LPs, compilation LPs, not their own, but compiled with other groups. The single was released in 1980, received fairly good reviews. And of course, in Boise, since he was a local band, it sold pretty well in Boise. A lot of college plays, a lot of commercial radio plays, again, primarily here in Boise. But one of the strange things that occurred is he became extremely popular in Germany. And that 3-song single that he made, that the band made, was named one of the greatest all-time singles in Germany. I don't have a song to play for you right now, but if you go to YouTube, look up Pete Hawley and the Looks, you'll find the song there, and you can listen to it. This is another man that some people look at and they say, what? He's in Boise? How the heck did he end up in Boise? Reginald Owen is at Morris Hill Cemetery. He was a very well-known actor. He came to the United States from England in 1920, did a lot of work on Broadway. He moved to Hollywood and began appearing in a whole lot of films. Probably one of his better known roles, he portrayed Ebenezer Scrooge in the 1938 version of A Christmas Carol. He also played both Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson in a number of movies and even on TV. Later on in his career, he did guest shots on shows like Maverick, and he also was in the movies Mary Poppins and Bedknobs and Broomsticks. And he ended up here retiring and ended up here in Boise. Charles Osner was a very famous artist for his time. If you've been down to the Capitol building, if you go into the Capitol building, you will find a large statue, a gold statue of George Washington astride his horse. Charles Osner was the artist that made that. It's known as the Charles Osner statue. It was originally carved from pine, and it took 4 years for him to make. Carved it from pine, overlaid it with gold. And he was working as a miner when he got this idea, and he actually modeled it in snow first while he was working as a miner. And he used a postage stamp for the likeness of George Washington to use for his statue. He gave the statue to the Idaho Territory. It wasn't a state yet in 1869. Idaho didn't become a state till 1890. He gave it to the Idaho Territory in 1869. He also designed, and I'm still trying to find which ones, but he also designed several of the monuments in Morris Hill and Dry Creek and Pioneer Cemetery here in town. Now, Morris Hill Cemetery has only 3 mausoleums. Mausoleums are known as houses for the dead because that's basically what they look like. The bodies are kept inside the mausoleum. And Lieutenant Colonel John Green has one of only 3 mausoleums at Morris Hill Cemetery. He's a Medal of Honor winner. Received the Medal of Honor in 1897 for his actions at the Lava Beds, California Indian Wars. He received the Indian Wars were in 1873. He received the Medal of Honor in 1897. And the quote from the award that he got when he was given it, the quote was, "In order to reassure his command, this officer in the most fearless manner and exposed to every danger walked in front of the line." He literally led his soldiers into battle. Now, really, he never held a rank higher than lieutenant colonel, but everybody thought he was a general. People in Boise always referred to him as General Green. So on his monument, in front of his monument, there's a military marker, a flat marker, and it states Medal of Honor and Brevet Brevet Brigadier General U.S. Army. Brevet means it's kind of an honorary title, but everybody called him General, so they put that on his marker. This is a young man that's not famous at all, but his marker is fairly well known. Morris Hill Cemetery has a very large section called the Field of Honor, and it's where the military markers are. It's in the back of the cemetery. You can't miss it. It has all of the standard upright, rounded top granite monuments, a huge military section. And in these, with these standard military markers, you see this one. It's very different. It was placed by his family. His family wanted him to be remembered. They wanted to remember him and remember him as a very special young man. So they wanted his monument to be different and special, different than the standard military markers that are there. He's a Civil War veteran. He's a private, Richard Ball. He was born in 1844 in Illinois and went to Camp Macon, Illinois in 1862. He was 18 years old. He was there for 3 years. He was part of Company F, 116th Illinois Infantry. Transferred to Company F, 55th Illinois Infantry in 1865. He went AWOL for 6 months. So when he came back, he had to spend an extra 6 months in the military to make up for that. But his monument has a very nice photograph of him on one side. On the other side is a register showing his name on Company F, 116th Volunteer Infantry. And again, it is here because his family placed it there because they wanted him to be really well known. They wanted him to know that they really remembered him, they really loved him, and wanted to let him know he was special. His description is also on the roster there. He had red hair, blue eyes, 5'8". He was tall, he was a farmer, and he was single. But it's very easy to spot when you drive by the Field of Honor. You'll see that monument.
David, we have a question from Kathy asking, how did he get to Boise?
His family was here. You're talking about Private Ball. His family was here. His family eventually moved here. They grew up back in Illinois. His family was in Illinois. Eventually, the family moved out to Boise, and when he died, they brought him out here to Boise to be with the rest of the family.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. A young lady that, again, is not really well known, but really has an interesting life, Bonnie McCarroll. She is known as the last lady bronc rider. Now, her monument is at Morris Hill also. She has what's known as a ledger monument, and a ledger uh, is designed to protect the grave. Years ago, when the pioneers were coming out west, the wagon trains, the hand carts, all those across the prairie, across the desert, um, when one of the members of the family died, obviously they didn't keep the body and bring it out west with them. So they buried the body wherever the person happened to die. But they didn't want animals digging up the body and desecrating it, especially wolves. And they would put huge boulders over the grave to cover it and protect it. They were called wolf stones. And eventually they became what we call ledgers because of the way it looks. And it's very nice. It's a nice marker, but it's still pretty much for the same reason. It covers exactly where the grave is, protects the grave from being dug up, primarily by animals. We're not too worried about that now in Boise. However, we still have animals coming down from the hills. But that was the original reason for that type of marker, was to protect the grave. Now, Bonnie was a very famous lady bronc rider. And in 1929, she was going to make her final appearance at a rodeo in Oregon, the Pendleton Roundup in Oregon. That was her retirement. It was her last one. She was going to retire. She was going to retire with her husband, Frank McCarroll, and this was going to be her last ride. She drew a horse by the name of Black Cat, and on her first ride, the horse turned a somersault on top of her, mortally wounded her, and she died 10 days later. After Bonnie's accident, the Pendleton Roundup Rodeo discontinued bronc riding for women because they said it was too unsafe for women. By 1941, women's bronc riding was discontinued from all major rodeo competitions because they felt it was too dangerous based on this accident. In 2002, she was posthumously inducted into the Rodeo Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City. C.W. Moore. Very large mining areas in Ruby City and Silver City that he developed. And he also ran general stores in a lot of mining communities. And his stores were very successful. He supplied the miners with all the things they needed, groceries, the mining equipment they needed. His stores were even served as the post office and the bank in a lot of these small towns. He moved to Boise in 1867, and he, along with other partners, established the First National Bank of Idaho. In 1891, he created the Boise Artesian Hot and Cold Water Company. If you happen to know it, underground in Boise are a lot of underground geothermal hot springs. The old Idaho Penitentiary, the early buildings were heated by steam from the geothermal hot springs. A lot of houses along Warm Springs Avenue are heated with steam. Warm Springs Avenue is called Warm Springs Avenue because of the geothermal activity under the area. Some of the older buildings in downtown Boise, including the Capitol building, are heated with geothermal steam. C.W. Moore jumped on that. He had the first house in the country heated by steam from the geothermal hot springs, created a company to handle that. And again, his was the first home in the country heated with that, and became very successful. A lot of old homes and buildings in Boise were heated with that. He also was president of that First National Bank of Idaho. Again, founded the water company. Also founded the children's home that's on Warm Springs Avenue. He was also the director of the Capitol Electric Light, Motor, and Gas Company. So not only did he have the hot springs, he had electricity and gas. And again, a lot of buildings in Boise were heated with that, including the old state pen. Laura Moore Cunningham was the daughter of C.W. Moore. And Laura Cunningham was very well known for her philanthropic activities. Very generous. She donated the family home at the corner of Walnut and Warm Springs to the city to use as an arboretum. And her obituary, written in the Idaho Statesman, she died in 1963. The quote from that: "Boise has lost her first lady." She had been a resident of the city for her entire life, which covered a span of years roughly that of the city of Boise, from the time it was a village of 500 to the present. She grew up with the city, has given generously to it all her life. Every major cultural and civic organization has felt the support that her hand has provided. And Mrs. Cunningham was not only a lovely lady, she was also a gracious, self-effacing in everything she did. And she is uh, at that Moore family plot in Morris Hill. This is one that I'm kind of proud of. I had some little involvements in this. Elvina Moulton. She was known by her friends as Aunt Viney. Elvina Moulton was buried out at the Morris Hill Cemetery, and basically, back in 1917, segregation was fairly rampant. She was buried out at Morris Hill Cemetery with what basically was a county-provided marker, very small marker you can see there. Over the years, it's become very worn, has a large crack in it. And knowing my involvement with cemeteries, a few years ago, the city the State Historical Society asked if by chance I had a photograph of her grave. I actually hadn't heard of her before, and I didn't have a photograph of her grave, but guess what? Within a half hour, I went out and got a photograph of her grave because they wanted to put together a special display. Elvina Moulton is very prominent in Idaho history. She was Boise's first African-American woman. She was born in Kentucky. She was a slave in Kentucky. She literally walked the Oregon Trail from Kentucky to Boise. She settled in Boise sometime around 1867. And when she was asked why she stopped in Boise, why she decided to settle here, she said, "I got tired," and settled here in Boise. She worked doing laundry as a seamstress, but eventually she actually bought a home right next to Boise Mayor Hawley on Idaho Street near 10th Street. And in 1878, she and 17 other Boiseans established the First Presbyterian Church in Boise. She was the only Black member among the group of all these prominent women. And again, the community knew her as Aunt Viney. She was very kind. She baked cookies for the local children and very much involved in the church activities. There was talk at one time about replacing her monument. Not something different, but something, just a newer version of what was there. And it was eventually decided, nah, you know what, it's more historical to leave it the way it was. So the Daughters of the American Revolution contacted me. They had seen my information, an article I posted on her. And they said, we want to put a DAR marker on her grave for her historical involvement. So I contacted Boise Parks and Recreation, told them about the plan, and they said, no, you can't do that. According to the rules of the cemetery, you can't have any non-standard cemetery markers, and they would not allow the DAR to put a marker on her grave. So now, if you go over to the Black History Museum, there is a very nice monument and plaque as a result of that. She has a very nice monument in the Islamic section of Morris Hill. Another young Islamic child who was 8 years old, Rashid. He is at Cloverdale Memorial Park. Cloverdale also has a separate Islamic section that's fenced off. He's there. And he was 8 years old when he died. He was an Iraqi refugee. His family lived in Boise. And his family said all he ever wanted to be was a police officer. Boise City Police Department heard about it, and they actually came and took Rashid and made him an officer, an honorary officer in the Boise City Police Department. They put him through a day of training where he got a uniform, did some mock training as an officer, became an honorary officer, and he died when he was 8 years old of a congenital illness. And I happened to be working at Cloverdale the day of his funeral. And his funeral was attended by several officers, including the chief of police. And it was a very nice service. And the Boise City Police kind of took him under their wing and took care of him. Orlando Robbins is kind of like, again, he was a lawman here in Idaho, and he's known as the Wyatt Earp of Ada County. Excuse me. He's at Pioneer Cemetery on Warm Springs. A lot of early Idaho pioneers are there. Very interesting place to tour. Orlando Robbins, he was known as Rube. The quote in Boise history, in Idaho history, the man most responsible for bringing law and order to the Idaho Territory. He served 25 years as a deputy U.S. Marshal. He was also Boise City Chief of Police and also a sheriff for Ada County. He also was a warden out at the Old State Penitentiary for a few years. And the Idaho State Penitentiary went through a lot of wardens. Average lifespan of a warden out there was 2 or 3 years. Now, Rube worked for John Haley's stage line. He rode shotgun to prevent robberies on the stage line. And it was said that he was so feared and respected by even the bad guys and the gunfighters that came to Idaho that if they knew he was riding shotgun on a stage, that would dissuade them from robbing that stage because he was on it. He achieved the rank of colonel in the Idaho militia, was a scout during the Indian Wars, 1870s, and also a member of the Idaho legislature representing Ada County. His wife was famous in her own right. His wife actually did not have a marker until a couple of years ago. And a historical group got together to place a marker. She was actually buried in an unmarked grave next to Orlando. Corilla Robbins was, again, one of these amazing pioneer women that really brought civilization into the Western territories. She first married Walter Brassfield. They had 4 children. They crossed the plains by ox cart in 1876, ended up in Idaho. Brassfield died, and she married Orlando in 1881. She is to the left of Orlando's grave now, of Orlando's marker. She pioneered the women's suffrage movement in Idaho, and she had a lot of firsts. She was the first traveling instructor for the Rebecca Lodge, which is the women's lodge of the Oddfellows organization. She was president of the Boise branch of the Flores Crittenden Home for orphan children, and also cared for many orphan children in her own home. She rode in the first automobile in Boise. She rode in the first airplane to arrive in Boise and had the first residential telephone in the city. And how about if we take about a 5-minute break if you need to stretch and come back in about 5 minutes and we'll continue on? Bethany, just let me know when you're ready to get started.
Yeah, I'm ready whenever you are. So
Okay.
whatever works.
All right. We're going to pick up back at Pioneer Cemetery. Pioneer Cemetery on Warm Springs. It's called Pioneer Cemetery. Guess why? Because there are a lot of of early Idaho, Ada County, Boise pioneers there. The very first recorded burial at Pioneer Cemetery was a little 6-year-old girl. Her name was Carrie Logan. The family has a family plot there. Her parents and she are there. Her grave is being the first one basically recorded there, 1864. Her individual marker, you can see, is fairly damaged and is starting to get kind of overgrown. But 6-year-old Carrie actually died on the Camas Prairie. She and her parents, they were moving to Boise in 1864. She died on the Camas Prairie, and that's where she was buried. Again, they buried the person where they died on the trek out. They obviously didn't keep the body with them. She was buried about 100 miles from Boise. They had about 100 miles to go. After the family got to Boise, they arrived in, excuse me, they arrived in Boise. They got settled. They went back out to find her, to bring her back to Boise to be properly buried. Her parents were Thomas and Carolyn. They went back out to, excuse me, went back out to the Camas Prairie, found her, and then reburied her at what would become Pioneer Cemetery. Thomas was a partner in a drugstore, Williams and Logan drugstore, and also in a partner in a general store. He was a stockbroker, also a director of the First National Bank of Idaho. He was Idaho's first postmaster and mayor of the city from 1876 to 1878. Near where the Idaho Historical Museum is now, there is a pioneer village that has some old buildings there. And if you go there and look, you will see the Logan home from 1865 stands in that pioneer village. George Shoup was a territorial governor and also a governor of Idaho after Idaho became a state. He was the last territorial governor and the first governor of the state of Idaho when it became a state in 1890. He also was Idaho's first state senator. He started off, he was a stockman in Illinois, a wagon train captain on a trek to Denver, member of the Independent Scouts of Colorado. When he was a miner, like a lot of people were here, came to Idaho for the gold rush. He was a miner before coming in 1866. 1870, he became good friends with an Indian chief by the name of Tendoy. Tendoy was the chief of a mixed band of Native Americans, and it was actually Shoup's friendship with Chief Tendoy that smoothed over relations really well between the settlers and the Native Americans here back in those days. He has a very nice, very nice monument there at Pioneer Cemetery. James Pinney is known as the father of modern Boise. He's also at Pioneer. He served 3 terms as mayor and introduced a lot of improvements into the city. He had built a brick 2-story fire station on Main Street. It was the very first building owned by the city. The city purchased Morris Hill Cemetery at that time. And also there used to be toll bridges at the entrances to Boise. And you had to pay a toll when you came into Boise. He purchased those, the city purchased those, and the tolls were abolished. He extended the city boundaries to the south and to the west. And during his time in office, the first 10 miles of the city sewer system was placed. He also built the Columbia Theater in 1892, was the state's first opera house. And in 1908, the five-story Penny Theater, made of brick and stone and cement, and was virtually one of the first fireproof buildings in the city. John Haley, we talked about him just a little bit, mentioned him earlier. Haley came across the plains in 1853, had a 5-yoke ox team that was headed for Oregon. He participated in the Jackson County Rogue River Indian War. He raised livestock, he farmed. In 1856, he began an operation of a ferry across the Rogue River. In 1863, he established the saddle and pack train route from the Columbia River to the Boise Basin mines, added a stage line, and along with the stage line, he added another stage line from Umatilla, Oregon to the Boise Basin, and eventually extended that stage line all the way to Ogden, Utah. He served 2 terms as an Idaho delegate to the 43rd and the 49th Congress. And again, like a lot of people, he also served 2 years as warden of the Idaho State Penitentiary. He became the first director of the Idaho State Historical Society, and he's the one that wrote that huge 4-volume book, The History of Idaho, in 1910. And guess what? The city of Haley, Idaho, is named for him. Judge Milton Kelly is also at Pioneer Cemetery. He's best known as, for 17 years, he was the owner and editor of the Idaho Statesman newspaper. Before he came to Idaho, he worked in the mercantile business in Ohio. He was an attorney in Wisconsin. He also ran a string of pack animals in California and Oregon, and that eventually brought him to the gold mining area in Placerville, Idaho. 1865, President Lincoln appointed Kelly as an Associate Justice of the Territorial Supreme Court. Again, Idaho wasn't a state yet, so it was the Territorial Supreme Court. He purchased the Idaho Statesman in 1872. His contemporaries described him, very interesting terms, temperamental, vindictive, unlikable. But he also was said to be very fair and very courageous in his rulings as a judge when he served in that position. Edward Stevenson is also at Pioneer Cemetery. He's the only Democrat to be appointed, have been appointed as an Idaho territorial governor. In Coloma, California, he served as deputy sheriff. He was later elected to the state legislature. And he was appointed an agent for an Indian agency, for Indian agencies. While he was away on official business, hostile Indians attacked the agency. They killed his wife and his 3 children, along with several other agency employees. One of the employees lived long enough to identify one of the Native Americans that was involved in the raid as a young man that Stevenson had actually taken into his home and raised with his own children. The young Indian was captured by a posse. He confessed, and Stevenson personally took a rope from his saddle and personally hanged the young man from a nearby tree. He came to Idaho in 1863, was involved in mining and farming. He entered politics. He served as governor. He was involved in business, politics. He made an attempt to separate the northern part of the territory from the south and align it with Washington. Northern Idaho, under his plan, would have actually become part of Washington. Very instrumental in preventing this secession of that area. And he was also very active and served as Grand Master of the Idaho Masonic Lodge. And it was actually the Idaho Masonic Lodge that had that monument constructed and placed for him. A lot of people may remember David Falk. And if not David specifically, they might remember the Falk store downtown. David Falk, again, he and his family are at Pioneer Cemetery. They left Germany, moved to New Hampshire in 1850. 1859, he moved to Portland and opened a store there, a mercantile store there, and later another one in the Dalles, Oregon. He moved to Idaho in 1864. 4 years after that, his brother Nathan and he got together and opened up the D. Falk and Company Mercantile in downtown Boise. A third brother, Sigmund, joined him in the 1870s. The store changed names several times, but it was in continuous operation until it closed in 1986, always under the name of Falk. But when it closed, it was known as Falk's Idaho Department Store. And the building housing the store still has the Falk name on it. Peter Sona was another well-known Boise citizen. He's also at Pioneer. And he came from the gold rush again. He followed gold to California in 1849. Then he ended up in Lewiston in the Idaho mines. In 1883, he moved to Boise, became partner in a hardware and general merchandise store at 9th and Main. He built what was known as the Sona Block with a store and an opera house. He was appointed to the board of directors of the First National Bank, also an original investor in that artesian hot and cold water company. Served on the Capitol Building Commission when it was designed, involved in bringing the railroad line to Boise, and served a 2-year term as Boise mayor in 1893. Thomas Jefferson Davis and his family are also at Pioneer. He traveled west in 1861, and he was involved in mining until 1863. 1863, he realized that the miners needed fresh fruit and vegetables. There was a great need for that. He acquired 360 acres of government land and planted. His first crops were onions, potatoes, and cabbage. The following year, he planted a very large, successful apple orchard. He's also considered a founding father of Boise. In 1863, and he and 7 other men met in a cabin, basically laid out the new town site. He donated land to the city of Boise to be used as a park, stipulating the park would be named Julia Davis Park in honor of his wife. And if you go to Julia Davis Park, you will find a statue of her offering an apple to a little girl in remembrance of that huge apple orchard that they planted many years ago. Jesus was known as Idaho's premier muleteer. This is one of those people that so many people have never heard of, but he played such an important part in Idaho and in Boise. He was born to Basque immigrant parents in the San Francisco area, became a naturalized American citizen in 1860. Now, in 1850, at 17 years of age, he began a pack train operation, and he gradually expanded that from California to 6 other states. He carried food, clothing, supplies to every mining operation in the Western U.S. Huge operation. He was also the first packer to carry supplies to the Thunder Mountain mine in the Owyhee Mountains. He was the first to make a very hazardous trip through the Sierra Nevada mountains to Carson City and Virginia City, Nevada, and the first to pack into what is now Montana. Now, his most challenging venture was taking 8,400 feet of copper wire to the Yellow Jacket mine in Challis, Idaho, to be used for a tram. This wire was 1 constant length of wire, one solid length of 8,400 feet. And it had to be brought to the mine without any break. It had to be maintained in one piece. It was going to be used for construction of a tramway, and any splice in the wire would have made it too dangerous to use on the tram. Could have broken. He coiled the cable. It was 4,500 pounds. Coiled that cable literally from one mule to another, spreading it out over 35 mules. It was a 70-mile trip up and down very steep terrain. And if one of the mules fell, they all did. And he had to repack everything. It finally got there. He finally was successful in getting the wire to Chalice. For his drivers in Boise, he also built 30 small one-room buildings for his drivers to live in. He housed the packers in the cabin on his property until his death, and at his death, his daughter maintained the property of these small cabins. If you go downtown, where the Ronald McDonald House is, it's got the new one there on the corner, but next to it was the original Ronald McDonald House. In front of that is a monument with an old camera, a box camera, and that camera is pointed in the direction of where those 30 cabins were. And that's a monument to Jesus and his efforts. He came up from a working class immigrant. He was very well respected, very industrious, and exemplified Mexican heritage in Idaho's very, very diverse ethnic pioneers. A couple of governors in Pioneer Cemetery. One of the newer monuments is to, Governor Cecil Andrus. And not only was he governor, but he was also the U.S. Presidential Cabinet Secretary and governor of Idaho. He served as the 42nd United States Secretary of the Interior under Jimmy Carter from 1977 to 1981. He was a member of the Democratic Party. He served the state of Idaho as the 26th and the 28th governor. And during the two terms he served as governor, a very strong proponent of environmental issues and preservation, increased funding for education, battled the federal government to remove nuclear waste from Idaho. And during his tenure as Secretary of the Interior, he continued to prioritize efforts on the environment, and it was also a very strong voice for the nation's farmers. Governor Robert Smiley is also at Pioneer Cemetery, not too far. Governor Andrus is not too far from Governor Smiley. And he's the only man elected to 3 consecutive terms as governor of Idaho. He was first elected governor in 1954. He helped the moderate Republicans of the state regroup after the defeat of Barry Goldwater in '64. His bid for re-election as governor in 1966 failed. But he was also mentioned as a possible vice presidential nominee in 1968. He did support a 3-cent state sales tax in 1965, and he believes that's probably what led to his defeat in his bid for the governorship in 1966. Another well-known Idahoan, Gib Hochstrasser, if you remember him. Gib Hochstrasser is at Dry Creek Cemetery. Very nice spot up on a hill. He formed the Northwest's really premier big dance band called the Kings of Swing. Formed the Kings of Swing in 1974. They played all over the West, Las Vegas, Seattle, Portland, most major cities in Idaho. and they were participants. Every year, the Sun Valley held the Swing and Dixie Jazz Jamboree. He played in that and played in every Idaho governor's inaugural ball since 1982. Another resident up at Dry Creek Cemetery, Officer Mark Stahl, and he's the first Boise City police officer killed in the line of duty in the history of the city police department. It was early in the morning, September 30th, 1997, and he was shot and killed during a traffic stop. Boise officers had stopped the car on a routine traffic violation. The two occupants of the car refused to get out of the vehicle, and the traffic stop turned violent. Officer Stahl responded as a backup officer. Suddenly, the two occupants of the vehicle exited the vehicle and immediately opened fire on the officers. Officer Stahl was struck on the right side of his body, just above his protective vest. Other officers returned fire. Both suspects were killed. Another officer was also seriously injured. Officer Stahl has got a very nice monument, as you can see there, up on a hill in Dry Creek Cemetery. Another Boise officer killed in the line of duty is a K-9 officer. K-9 officer Jardo. He was killed. He died November 11th, 2016. I'm sorry. He didn't die at that point. That's when he was shot. His handler, Corporal Shane Williams, and Jardo were part of a special operations unit search team. They were searching an area of a Boise neighborhood for a wanted armed suspect. The suspect ambushed the officers, opened fire on the officers, struck two officers before his location could be determined. K-9 officer Jardo immediately performed his job and charged towards the gunfire and the suspect. In doing so, the suspect diverted fire away from the officers, turned the gun on Jardo, and Jardo was shot. Two Boise City officers and Jardo were shot by the suspect. Both officers and Jardo were rushed to local hospitals for immediate treatment. They thought Jardo might recover. He actually made an appearance at a candlelight vigil ceremony at the Idaho Law Enforcement Monument in Meridian for the one officer that was very critically wounded. But he unfortunately died November 16th, 2016. His actions on the 11th prevented officers from receiving additional gunfire. He did exactly what he was trained to do. He turned the gunfire away from the officers and towards himself and allowed those officers then to return fire. Jardo was cremated. His remains at this point are with his handler, Shane Williams. There is a possibility, there is next to the law enforcement memorial monument out at the state police headquarters in Meridian, there is now a K-9 officer memorial. It's a possibility in the future that he may be placed there. But right now he's with his handler. Going to turn to sports for a minute. You might remember Harmon Killebrew as a baseball player. We're going to get a little outside of Boise here now. Riverside Cemetery in Payette is where Harmon Killebrew is, a very famous ball player. He was nicknamed Killebrew, Hammer and Killebrew, Hammer and Harmon. Played first base, third base, left field, played with the Washington Senators, Minnesota Twins, Kansas City Royals, played for 22 years. He amassed career total of 1,283 runs scored, 2,086 hits, 573 home runs, 1,584 runs batted in, and a batting average of .256. He has a very nice monument, monument at Riverside Cemetery in Payette. In his finest season in 1969, hit 49 home runs, 140 runs batted in, won American League's Most Valuable Player Award, led the American League in home runs 6 times, 3 times in runs batted in, and named 11 times to All-Star teams. He had the longest measured home run in Minnesota Metropolitan Stadium history and in the Baltimore Memorial Stadium history. He actually hit the ball. He's one of 4 batters to hit a baseball over the left field roof at Tiger Stadium, inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in 1984. We have several Medal of Honor winners in Boise, in the Boise cemeteries. Dan Schoonover is one. He's at Morris Hill. And he won the Congressional Medal of Honor in the Korean War. He was a corporal in the U.S. Army Company A, 13th Engineer Combat Battalion, 7th Infantry Division, and he was awarded his Medal of Honor for service in Korea, July 8th to 10th, 1953. A number of them are at the Idaho State Veterans Cemetery. Now, when you go to the Veterans Cemetery, you can tell a Medal of Honor winner because the lettering and inscriptions on their monument will be in gold. That lets you know that they are a Medal of Honor recipient. Colonel Bernard Fisher, he was the first Air Force recipient of the Medal of Honor during the Vietnam War. In 1966, he led a mission to provide close air support to troops in contact with the enemy. He was a member of what they called the Sky Raiders, the A-1 Sky Raiders. One of the jets was hit by enemy fire, forced to make a crash landing on an airfield that was overrun by the enemy. And Colonel Fisher actually landed his A-1 on the strip, picked up the stranded pilot, while the other A-1s provided air support from the enemy positions located only 200 yards away. Ed Freeman was known as Too Tall Freeman. He was a Vietnam Congressional Medal of Honor winner. And he's called Too Tall because originally in 1955, he really wanted to be a pilot. And in 1955, the height limit, before 1955, he was too tall. He was 6'4" and he was considered too tall to be a pilot. In 1955, the height limit was raised, and that allowed him to become a pilot. So they nicknamed him Too Tall. That stuck with him. He flew 14 separate rescue missions, providing evacuation to an estimated 30 seriously wounded soldiers. He was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Bush in 2001. Arthur Jackson, another Medal of Honor recipient. This was for World War II. And he was awarded for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty while serving with the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, 1st Marine Division, actions against enemy Japanese forces in 1944. And again, you can see the letterings in gold indicating a Medal of Honor winner. Just down the street from Cloverdale Cemetery and Cloverdale Funeral Home is Terrace Lawn Memorial Park. It's also operated by Cloverdale. And there are wall crypts there at Terrace Lawn. And one of them says, "Remembering the Forgotten." It has the seal of the Office of the Coroner there. And it has Cloverdale Funeral Home, County Coroner's Office on there. And this is a crypt where the cremated remains of basically forgotten people, unclaimed or abandoned at the coroner's office, are placed. In the past couple of years, 65 people, their remains have been placed there. Once a year, they have a very nice ceremony. And if someone is cremated, if it's a coroner's case, coroner is involved, and the body's cremated after the autopsy, after the coroner's finished, they're placed in basically a closet. Prior to this crypt here, they just stayed in that closet forever. One of the funeral directors at Cloverdale met with the coroner, and they decided to give these folks a more proper resting place. And now, if cremated remains remain in the coroner's office for more than a year, they are moved and placed in this very nice crypt at Terrace Lawn. And they have a very nice ceremony that does that once a year. Mentioned the Hannafin family earlier. Hannafin's cigar store. Unfortunately, that closed last year. The Hannafin family is also at Terrace Lawn Memorial Park. And Hannafin's was one of the few true, honest to goodness cigar stores left in the country. A smoke shop, all these little smoke shops, the vape shops and whatnot are all over the place. But a true smoke shop, a true cigar store is very rare. They sold magazines, cigars, and cigarettes. And the folks said it looked exactly like a smoke shop should. A huge glass door that opened, creaky wooden floors, dirty windows plastered with all kinds of flyers, an old beat up counter, and they sold all kinds of cigars and tobacco products and things there. Unfortunately, that's no longer there. To end up with, we're going to go a little bit beyond the Treasure Valley up to Ketchum. Ketchum, Idaho, that cemetery there are some fairly well-known folks up in the Ketchum area. A lot of famous people from TV, from movies, had homes up in the Ketchum Sun Valley area. Some retired up there. Ernest Hemingway and his family are at the Ketchum Cemetery. Very sad story. Ernest was born in Oak Park, Illinois, grew up in the Chicago suburbs. He died at his home in Ketchum, July 2nd, 1961. He had a very adventurous life. 19 years old, he was almost killed by shrapnel. He drove an ambulance during the war over in Italy. On a wild game safari in Africa, he survived 2 plane crashes in the African jungle. He fought during the Spanish Civil War, joined the Republic forces as an ambulance driver, had many close calls there, and wrote, as you all know, several books: Farewell to Arms, Death in the Afternoon, The Green Hills of Africa, For Whom the Bell Tolls, all of those his books. He loved living in the Ketchum area. He settled there and sort of retired there. But everything caught up with him. The plane crashes. He began drinking very heavily, working very hard, playing very hard. He settled in Ketchum. It was his favorite hunting area. But he suffered from very severe depression, partially because of his health issues, because of finances. He was writing a book that he wasn't sure if anyone would buy. He had a home in Cuba, and he was afraid that Castro might steal that and take that. The Castro regime might take his home in Cuba, but suffered from very severe depression. He won the Nobel Prize, the Pulitzer Prize. Unfortunately, the family had a very tragic history. His father committed suicide. Ernest also took his own life. He attended a dinner at a Ketchum restaurant. He was 61, went home, and using a rifle, shot himself, took his own life. Mary is buried next to him. She was the last of Ernest's 4 wives. She's the literary executor of the estate. She died in Ketchum in 1986. The pair they actually were married in Cuba in 1946. They lived in Cuba for a while. And again, Hemingway had a lot of medical problems. His His health declined, hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, again, heavy drinking, hard living. Um, and she did her best to try to take care of him and basically to hide all of his problems from the rest of the world. Um, and indeed, she actually initially tried to cover up the suicide, claiming that it was an accidental gunshot. 1961, Ernest, very sick, very depressed, shot himself with his favorite 12 gauge shotgun. Mary tried to cover it up, trying to protect his reputation, saying that it was an accident, that he accidentally shot himself while cleaning the gun. Everybody knew this was malarkey. The man had lived with firearms most of his life. He was an expert at firearms, and there was no way he would accidentally shoot himself cleaning his shotgun. Eventually, she admitted that it was a suicide. Margot Hemingway, again, another tragic member of the family. She's also buried up in the Ketchum Cemetery. Surprisingly, and I don't know if it's surprising or not, but there's a Hemingway family plot at the Ketchum Cemetery. Ernest is there. His wife is there. His brother and his wife are there. Margot is there, but at quite a distance from the family plot. Margot died in Los Angeles in 1996. She was born in Portland, Oregon, grew up in Ketchum. Her father is Jack Hemingway. I'm sorry, well, Jack is not Ernest's brother, it's his son. And she was the daughter of Jack Hemingway, so Ernest was her grandfather. 1975, when she was 21, she had a really great career going in films. She had $1 million contract with Fabergé Perfume on magazines all over the world. By 1986, she was having serious financial trouble, having trouble finding work. Again, like so many people in her family, turned to alcohol to ease her problems. She actually supported herself later in life by autographing her photos that appeared in Playboy magazine. She even worked on a psychic telephone hotline to raise money. She was last seen alive June 29th, found by police in her bed, her legs propped up on a pillow, a book in her lap. She left low notes. After her death, her sister Muriel Hemingway stated she thought Margot died of an epileptic seizure and not from an accidental drug overdose, as the police reported. Margot has a small marker. And in this picture, the two ledgers in the front, those are Ernest Hemingway and his wife. And to the right of that is Jack, his son, and his wife. If you look to the left of the picture, to the far left-hand corner, you'll see a pine tree over there. And Margot is actually buried way away from the family plot, up by that pine tree. Ann Southern's also at the Ketchum Cemetery. If you remember Ann Southern from movies and TV. She was born in North Dakota, and her career, 6 decades, 64 movies, 175 TV episodes. In the 50s, her series was Private Secretary, The Ann Southern Show. She received an Oscar nomination in 1988 for The Whales of August. She died in Ketchum. She lived in Ketchum, Idaho. She's there at the cemetery also. Patty Duke is up in Coeur d'Alene. Probably remember Patty Duke. She died in 2016. She lived in Coeur d'Alene. In 1959, she starred with Anne Bancroft in the Broadway play The Miracle Worker. It ran for 2 years, and that play was made into a film in 1962, and she received the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for that movie. 1963, she starred in The Patty Duke Show. Um, that series lasted 3 seasons, earned her an Emmy Award nomination. Numerous films from 1965 to 2012. In 1982, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and she was one of the first celebrities to go public with that illness. She became an activist for mental health causes. From 1985 to 1988, she was president of the Screen Actors Guild. 2004, got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. George Kennedy lived in Middleton when he died. He moved to Middleton to be with his family, his son. Died in 2016. Now, it was reported, supposedly, he was cremated and put up at the Idaho State Veterans Cemetery. He is not. He's not there. His son has his cremated remains. He may end up there at some point, but his son has him. Probably best known for really strong supporting roles, especially in Cool Hand Luke in 1967. He became associated with the Naked Gun film series, the comedies, worked in TV series Sarge and on Dallas. He was even on The Young and the Restless. Got a Hollywood Walk of Fame star in 1991. Maureen O'Hara actually lived in Boise. She is buried at Arlington National Cemetery with her husband. She was born in Ireland, and she died in Boise in 2015. She was in a Hitchcock film, Jamaica Inn, also with Charles Laughton. If you remember the movie The Hunchback of Notre Dame with Charles Laughton, she was the female lead in 1939. How Green Was My Valley, Miracle on 34th Street. She made 5 films with John Wayne, including Rio Grande. And she was John Wayne's favorite co-star and a really good friend. John Wayne called Maureen O'Hara the greatest guy I ever knew. They made a very famous movie, the two of them together, The Quiet Man. 1963, she appeared with Wayne and as Catherine in the movie McClintock. And in 1968, she married the love of her life, a pilot, General Charles Blair. 1971, her final film with Wayne was Big Jake. She moved to Boise to be with her family, and she's with her husband at Arlington. Lastly, Adam West. He's actually not buried in Boise. He's scattered in the Pacific Ocean, but he lived in Ketchum, the Sun Valley area. Lots of TV roles. Most people remember him as Bruce Wayne in Batman on the TV series Batman, 66 to 68. He also was in a lot of movies and TV shows before that. He worked in television. He was in early on in 1954, the Philco Goodyear Television Playhouse. Made a picture with Boris Karloff called Voodoo Island. He was in The Young Philadelphians in 1959. And there was a very low budget, not too great science fiction movie he was in, Robinson Crusoe on Mars in 1964. Tons of TV guest roles, 77 Sunset Strip, Maverick, Hawaiian Eye. He was in the series The Detectives. And his last TV role was in an animated series. He played himself, Mayor West, in the series Family Guy. Now, to show you his sense of humor, this is the Sun Valley phone book. Adam West, Adam, C. Wayne, Bruce, millionaire. You go and look up Wayne, Bruce, millionaire. Please consult crime fighters in the yellow pages. You go to the yellow pages, look at crime fighters, see Batman in the white pages. You go to the white pages, Batman, see Adam West. Let Just going to zip through these. All right. I'm sorry we're 7 minutes overdue. um, but the whole idea here is to get you interested and maybe go visit these folks. They're pretty accessible. Most are local. And you visit the cemeteries, Morris Hill, Dry Creek, Pioneer, Ketchum, all these places full of history. If you go to the Boise Parks and Recreation webpage, you will see a link to the 3 cemeteries that they manage. And there are walking tours of those cemeteries and a list of the famous people there. There are maps of those cemeteries. You can look up where the burials are. A site that I contribute quite a bit to called Find a Grave, findagrave.com. If you go to a specific cemetery, it will list the famous people that are buried there. So again, just tons of history, beautiful monuments and statues and arts. This time of year, they're gorgeous with the colored leaves and trees and whatnot. They're great for just taking a stroll on a Sunday afternoon. So I encourage you to go visit them and look up some of these people if you like. But they're a great place to visit. And I thank you folks for attending this today.
Thank you, David, and thank you everyone for attending. I know I learned so much and it was so interesting. We do have a brief questionnaire for those of you who don't mind taking it. It's in the chat and it's also on your screen right now. So you can highlight over that or click the link and it should take you to that. And it just will take a few minutes just so we know what we can do better in this new virtual world of NKA classes. And along with this, there will be a recording of this video on YouTube in a few days for anyone who wants to look at it or look at all of the other classes that we've done. You can see that, and it's called New Knowledge Adventures of Idaho. And that concludes our session today. So thank you, everyone. We hope you